So I was out there with no money, right, just as a lobbyist on environmental issues. That's how I got to meet Jerry when he was running for governor. And he was interested in land use planning and the environment, so he and I got to know each other. And there's an office called the Office of Planning and Research, which is really the policy office for the governor's office. And he asked me to head it up, and so I did that for 4 years.
That's great. Is Jerry Brown today the same Jerry Brown as back then?
I think Jerry Brown's yes, but even better. He's at the top of his game right now, I believe, in California. You know, he's brought the state back from. Look, Jerry and I always disagreed on some issues like criminal justice issues. You know, he signed the 3 strikes and you're out law, which we argued against, but he overruled us. But on climate change, there's nobody stronger than Jerry Brown in the world, I don't think, today. On nuclear disarmament, you know, on fiscal policy, look what he's done for the state. He's brought it back. He's got a rainy day fund, right, and had a $5 billion deficit before. But he's also, Jerry is more, he's looser. He listens more now, and he also says thank you, which he never did before. Yeah.
You know,
We stay in close touch.
Yeah, you've been in politics, and you've covered politics for all this time now, Bill. Is that a thing common for politicians, that they're so obsessed with themselves they don't say things like thank you, or it just happened to be, you know, Jerry Brown, and obviously Trump's a totally different animal on a different level, but what's your take on that?
Oh yeah, no doubt. I mean, a lot of them are just assholes, and and some people say you got to be an asshole to be successful in politics. I disagree with that. The first guy I worked with was a Republican when I was chief of staff. Peter Bear was his name, from Marin County, and he was a great guy. And the thing that I remember so much about Sacramento is people would say, like, who do you work for? I was always proud to say I work for Peter Bear. And people would then say, oh, God, you're lucky. This asshole that I work for, right? You know, I'm ashamed to tell you who I work for. So, and I was always proud to work for him, proud to work for Jerry as well. And just to add, after 4 years for Jerry, I just wanted to do something on my own. So I told Jerry I wanted to leave. I led an initiative campaign to tax the big oil companies and put that money into public transit. They were making these obscene profits.
That's awesome.
At the time. Prop 11, June 1980. And the oil companies put so much money in, they beat us by about 5 points. And that gave me a little exposure on television. So then I'm out of a job. What am I going to do? I decided I'd like to try some media, right? And I went to the #1 station in the state and figured I'd start there and then work my way down until I got a job in Chico, maybe, or Fresno. And that was KABC in Los Angeles. And that's where I started doing television commentary in 1989.
So this, I like your counterintuitive
79,
approach.
sorry, or 80, 1980.
You're like, no, I'm going to start at the top, right? Why not?
I didn't know where to start. I figured.
So why'd they hire you? Like, you hadn't worked in media before?
I'd like to say they hired me because they'd never seen anybody as good as me, but I didn't know shit from television. To be honest, no. You know what it was? I was lucky. I didn't realize this, but they were jumping from 2 hours of news to 3 hours of news. And they had a guy named Bruce Urshenson who did commentary, conservative. They had a guy named Al Julius who was off the wall, and they needed a third commentator. And I show up, and the news director had seen me just doing interviews on this initiative, and so he said, bingo, you got a job. So I never went to journalism school, no training whatsoever as a reporter or television person, and I'm on the #1 TV station in the state of California.
That's awesome. And you mainly did commentary there?
Commentary, 2.5 minutes every night on the 5 o'clock news.
That's great. That's so,
and I did that there for 9 years. Yeah.
Man, Bill, when you put your mind to something, you do it for a while. I mean, the seminary for 10 years, the KABC for 9.5 years.
Yeah, I don't take no for an answer.
I love it. I love it. But so part of the reason that we're doing these interviews is because I want people to learn from your successes, right? And so, and that's a common theme that you just mentioned, which is don't take no for an answer.
No, when I talk to kids, I always tell them just shoot high. You know, the higher you aim, the higher you get, right? And be balls of brass. When I went to that television station, I basically told them, look, there are 2 issues. I could show you the letter. I still have the letter. There are 2 issues in California today that are the most important issues: energy and environment. And I know more about them, having worked for Jerry Brown, than anybody else you're going to talk to. And you may be number one right now, but if you don't hire me, your ratings are going to go. Just like Donald Trump says about Arnold Schwarzenegger's ratings. Yeah.
Wow, that is brass balls. Yeah. If you don't hire me, your ratings are going down. Damn. Okay.
And then about a year later, or 6 months later, I got a call from KABC Radio. They said, hey, you're doing this TV. Why don't you come over here and do some stuff? So, I've been doing radio and TV like you. I mean, ever since then, all my life.
So then you start doing radio, and those are talk shows that last longer, get a lot of experience in being on air for a long time. When you make the jump to CNN?
I was still, so I'm doing television. I left KABC and ran for statewide office. I had politics in my blood. I had an itch. I had to scratch it. I had to run for office. I did. For insurance commissioner statewide. Lost in the primary to John Garamendi. Went back, but to a different station, to KCOP, Channel 13. And I was there, and one day I picked up the LA Times. We're going to get back to the same balls of brass. And I read that CNN, Michael Kinsley had left the job as Crossfire.
Yep. And
they were looking for somebody on the left. And all the people they were interviewing were the same old faces that you see every day from Washington, D.C., right? And we know most of them. And I just called up the executive producer of Crossfire, and I said, this is crazy. There are people outside of Washington who know what they're talking about, right? On these issues. I said, I'm on TV, I'm on radio every day. I know as much about these as these other guys. You need somebody from outside, beyond the Potomac, right? And so I think I just hit him between the eyes, and he said, okay, I'll give you you can come back and audition, get in the mix. And then I never heard from him again. Then I called him in 2 weeks, and I said, I'm going to be in Washington anyhow on my dime. And he said, okay, you can come by. And I went by and got the job.
Yeah, so that's another good lesson. I did the same thing in Miami a while back when I was first trying to break into television.
Yeah.
I just showed up at their door.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, if you're looking for an invitation, that's much harder to come by, right? Yeah. Make your own luck.
Yeah, you have to believe in yourself, and you got to be aggressive. And I knew I could do that job better than those guys could, and I know, and I didn't have no on the national level, no experience whatsoever. So got the job. They moved me back here to Washington, and I did Crossfire for 6 years until Pat Buchanan and I were both fired, and then Pat and I went over to MSNBC and did a show on MSNBC for a couple of years.
Yeah. So, what did you think of Jon Stewart's critique of Crossfire?
He was right on.
Okay, that's interesting.
He was right. Well, what had happened, without getting too much in the weeds, but Crossfire had been on the air for like 19 years. I was there for the last 6, and it was a damn good show. Bob Novak, Pat Buchanan, for a while was John Sununu, Mary Madeline, Tucker Carlson, and for 5 out of 6 years it was just me on the left. And then Walter Isaacson came in from Time Magazine, and he decided I can and Crossfire was the #1 rated political show in the country. Walter Isaacson said, who had no TV experience, no, I got a better idea. Let's move it over to George Washington University, put it in front of a studio audience. And they did, fired us, brought in James Carville, Paul Pagala, and others. They're good friends of mine, right? But the idea of putting a show in front of a studio audience, it became a gong show. In fact,
that's interesting.
That's when it really went. And they actually rang bells, and they had boxing gloves. And instead of a political debate show, it became a show where people were just looking for one-liners to get a reaction from the crowd.
Yep.
And that's what Stewart was responding to. And it became, like yucking it up, right? And
do you think that
so it lasted a year?
Yeah.
And then they killed it.
Do you think that if they did a Crossfire-like show today, that it would work?
Depends on whom you hire.
Yeah, well,
CNN tried to bring it back.
Oh, right. They did with Van Jones and those. And
Yeah,
Newt
and
Gingrich.
Van is great, but then they hired Newt Gingrich. Mm-hmm. Yeah, big mistake.
Yeah, I think their mistake there was that the Newt Gingrichs of the world are disingenuous. If they brought in a conservative with real ideology as opposed to doing talking points, self-aggrandizing, Newt wants to get back in politics, etc., right? Then if you had a real debate, I think it might work. And you're right, Van does not want to get into politics. He had a genuine point of view there that I think.
I think I'm a huge fan of Van. I mean, I think he's very strong. He's very direct, right? And he's a real believer. But Newt just makes stuff up.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem with the right wing. They're doing a lot. They do that fairly regularly. So, do you go back on CNN these days? I feel like I see you there every once in a while.
Well, actually, CNN brought me back. It's funny for 2016.
Yeah.
Brought me. I got a call out of the blue. It said, "Will you come back to CNN as a contributor?"
Yeah.
Because I discovered once I got there, they needed a Bernie guy. They needed a Bernie bro, right? So I became the Bernie bro for the primary.
That's funny.
And then stayed on for the general election, and now I'm back to just being another media whore. I'll go anywhere they call me.
Okay. So before we keep going, tell folks about how they can listen to your show.
It's the Bill Press Show, right? And it's YouTube/The Bill Press Show, right? Part of the Young Turks Network, right?
All right. So everybody remember, youtube.com/The Bill Press Show. So now, Pat Buchanan. So I had Pat on a bunch of times when I was on MSNBC. And so I've got mixed feelings. I grew up watching Pat on the McLaughlin Report, right?
Right.
McLaughlin Group.
Yeah.
And I was conservative and Republican back then. And Pat was at least honest on the air when I had him. But unfortunate opinions. So I wonder what your relationship with him was, having worked with him all those years.
I have a great admiration for Pat. He really works hard. He really believes this shit. I was always, he would come in, and as long as he had done this, a lot longer than I have, and he would have made notes, and he would study his stuff. He never came on the air without really putting a lot of work into every show. But what I've discovered about Pat is, on some issues, he was just hopeless, right? Mm-hmm. But on others, I saw him come around. I'll tell you, for example, Cuba, right? He was always against any lifting the embargo or any trade with Cuba, and I used to argue that. And Pat totally came around on that issue. Medical marijuana was another one where we used to really clash on medical marijuana, and Pat just finally realized, it's crazy what he was saying. So I admire that in anybody. But if there's a true blue conservative, the other thing about Pat that he and I is we were both against the war in Iraq. We were fired from MSNBC, our show, because both of us were against the war in Iraq. And Phil Griffith came down from New York and said, I can't have this. The public opinion is for this war, and here you two guys, you're on 1 to 3 every afternoon, and both of you are against this war. Can't have this.
He literally told you that.
Yeah, pulled the plug, right? And the other thing about Pat is on trade, and on jobs.
Yeah.
He's like Bernie, or like Trump. Keep the jobs, bring them back, keep the jobs here, and these trade deals are bad for American workers. So there is a time where you go so far left or so far right. You meet coming back the other way.
That's true. But the key to that is to actually be honest in your opinions. Yeah. Because if you're doing talking points, you won't meet. You won't meet anywhere in the middle, right?
But the problem with Pat, of course, is that he really does believe this is the end of Western civilization as we know it, because there are too many people who happen to have a dark skin who are moving up in American politics, and and he's just, that's abhorrent. He's dead wrong on that.
Yeah, it's a fatal flaw, right? And so one of my favorite moments when I was hosting on MSNBC was when Pat was on, and I asked him about the Southern strategy, because a lot of the Republicans, deny it or talk around it, et cetera. Yeah. And Pat was in the Nixon administration when they came up with the Southern strategy, and I said, Pat, you guys did this, and now the demographics are shifting, and he said, yeah, we had a good 40-year run. So it admits they did it, admits
Yeah,
it was based on demographics, in other words, race, and said, well, it was going to come to an end. Now, as it turns out, they had a little bit more left in them, right? So they did one last hurrah here with Trump.
Let's hope. Right.
I'm very confident of that, but we'll see.
I mean, the demographics are going to catch up with them.
Yes.
Eventually.
Yeah. And
I hope it's in 4 years.
Yeah, I think that this is just the establishment was just made an enormous error by running status quo Hillary Clinton. Otherwise, almost anybody else can beat Trump. But the people are so sick of the establishment, and they didn't vote for Trump. They voted against the establishment, and I think that's what happened here. I think that and we know how incompetent he is. So 4 years from now, I think we're going to have a enormously different dynamic.
No, I mean, I think you're right. Look, there are a lot of different explanations, the email thing, the Russian stuff and everything. But the bottom line is I think the Democratic Party nominated the wrong candidate. And I honestly believe that either Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders would have won and would have beat Donald Trump.
I actually don't have any doubt of that.
There's no way that Hillary, as good as a person as she is, could present herself as an agent of change.
Yeah.
Right.
And she didn't even want to, though. I mean, it's not in her DNA. She did not, and she didn't think that it was necessary. She thought things are fine. They'll vote for me.
Yeah.
But as we obviously know now, that it didn't work out that way, especially in some critical swing states. So out of all those different, and you've been doing the Bill Press show on the radio for a long time as well. Out of all those different jobs, did you have a favorite, one that you loved the most?
Wow, nobody's ever asked me that question. It might have been Crossfire. I mean, first of all, I love doing the show that I'm doing right now. Really, I really do. And doing radio and TV, everybody always said, well, which one do you prefer, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason it sounds contradictory, but the reason I always say usually talk radio is because I love the fact that with talk radio, you're not just looking at a camera and then you walk away, right? I mean, you get immediate reaction from people. You know how it is. Put out your whatever your opinion is on the issue of the day, and then people are in your face right away, and you got to respond. And you really get to know somebody that way, I think, more than television. But the one single job, that Crossfire job, working with the people that I did, again, being the #1 political show of the day, and it was a half an hour, it was one issue, and it was two hosts who knew enough to ask some pretty good questions, let's say, and then two guests who really knew the issues and were experts. At the end of a half an hour, people learned a lot. And they may not agree with you, but they learned a lot about that issue, and that's all I cared about. It was
back then, that was a big, big show. Did you sense the power that you had here in D.C.? And if you did, how does that get exhibited? Do you see what I'm saying by that?
No, I do. I tell you, yes, I did, because of the respect that we got from members of Congress, the leaders of the time. They would all come on the show, and because they all knew they'd have a chance to make their shot, and they'd be treated with respect, and to me, that was sort of an affirmation that we were doing a good job, or anybody in the country that we tried to, not just leaders, members of Congress. Jerry Falwell was often on the show, right? We could reach out and get people anywhere, anytime.
If you went to a steak restaurant in D.C., were they like, Mr. Press, right away?
Oh, no, yeah. Anywhere in the country was that way.
Yeah.
That was another way that you're connecting.
Right, because back then there just wasn't. I feel like it wasn't that long ago, but I guess it was in some ways. There was less media, and so the media stars were just known by everybody. So now, if you're a star on cable, there's a good chance that a lot of people don't know. This Angela Rye on CNN, she got into something at an airport. I didn't even know who she was, and I covered the news, right?
Well, first of all, there are more stations, right? There are more shows, and a lot of people don't get their news anymore, from television.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean,
things have changed, no question.
Podcast, YouTube, the Young Turks Network, they're not watching the cables.
Yeah, no, so I don't mean this to be a loaded question because, obviously we do it online, but Do you think it's better that they're getting it from a wider array of things, or maybe there was some advantage to everybody watching the same thing back in the day?
I think the more voice. I honestly believe the more voices, the better.
Mm-hmm.
That's why. And by the way, I don't care how, in a sense, as long as they're keeping up with what's going on and are interested in what's going on and are expressing their own voice. That's the last thing that I want to see is that people just turn off. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I find so exciting about the early days of this Trump administration is he has really awakened the base, if you will, stirred things up. I mean, we had 12 people camping out at our house for the Women's March on Washington. I've never seen, since People's Park March, maybe, right, the Vietnam protest, that kind of spirit among people. It was just overwhelming, right? And thank you, Donald Trump, for that.
That's right. And so back in the day, with the Vietnam protests, people's lives were on the line.
Yeah.
They might have to go to Vietnam and die. I mean,
right.
So that was those protests were enormous and very active and energetic because their life depended on it. So you're in the White House press briefings. Two questions out of that. One, is this unlike anything you've ever seen before?
Totally. Unlike anything anybody in the press corps has ever seen before. And to elaborate just a little bit, Sean Spicer comes in. Look, so I've only been there I started under Obama, going to the daily briefings. So Robert Gibbs, Jay Carney, Josh Earnest, and now Sean Spicer. Spicer walks in with a chip on his shoulder, and it's tense. It's antagonistic. He doesn't answer questions so much as he attacks reporters. There are some things he does that are good. He doesn't kiss the ass of the people in the front row, right?
Oh, yeah. So people at home don't know that. Let's pause for one second to talk about that. How much did that happen in the past? Why? And just tell us about that dynamic a little bit. All
right, so you got, first of all, the press briefing room is really small. There are 49 chairs in it, period. And now people stand around the sides, 49. And in the front row, there are assigned seats. You've got Associated Press, Reuters, CBS, NBC, CNN, ABC News, and Fox. So they're the big ones, if you will.
Yep.
Right? Second row, you've got CBS Radio and Wall Street Journal, and then NPR and Bloomberg. Right. So they're the ones, they're the big ones, right? So what Gibbs used to do, Gibbs would go right down the front row, and then he would start the back second row, and an hour have gone by, and nobody else gets a question. Now, Jay Carney started bouncing around a little bit, but still would always start like in the front. Josh Earnest would bounce around, but always call on everybody in the front row. Sean Spicer, he doesn't give a damn. He won't. So in the sense, he won't call on ABC some days. He won't call on NBC. He won't maybe not call on CNN. He'll call on the Christian Broadcast Network.
Yeah.
Or he'll call on somebody like me who sits in the back and doesn't always get a question. So that I think that's good. He also doesn't. All the others had a tendency that they would, like Obama, they might take 15 minutes to answer a question. And Sean Spicer will boom, boom, boom. And if somebody asks a question that's already been asked, he'll say, asked and answered. Next. So I that's good. Kind of particularly for somebody like me. But at the same time, a lot of times he doesn't answer he will not answer the question, and then he just comes up with this bullshit, like, attacking Sally Yates, accusing her of betrayal, right? And like David Corn said, how do you define betrayal? And Sean Spicer said, I'm not going to talk about it. It's betrayal. Or Kristen Walker asked him about the Muslim ban, and then he attacks her for using the phrase Muslim ban, and she says, wait a minute. That's what the president used in his tweet this morning. The ban. He calls it the ban. And Spicer says, well, he's only using the word the media use. No, we're using the word he uses. So there's never been this antagonism, open, that he really pisses people off. I was at the last briefing 2 days ago that I was there, after it was over, and it was really tense for 45 minutes. One of the conservative reporters, I won't give her name, got up, and as she walked out, she turned to me and she said, "He'll last a week."
Really? Well,
Yeah.
I don't believe her.
I don't either.
Yeah.
Because I think there's something else going on too. He's getting notes from Donald Trump during the briefing.
During the briefing. Wow, that I didn't
During
know.
the briefing. There are people that once in a while, an aide will get up and hand him a note, and so
That's amazing.
What we think is Trump is watching.
Mm-hmm.
He's tweeting or texting one of the aides sitting there, and they bring up and hand him a note.
That's
and one of them said, "Blame it on Obama."
Oh, somebody saw it?
Yeah, Muslim ban. Blame it on Obama.
That sounds like a Republican 101, though. Okay, so lots of interesting things out of that. And I want the audience to understand that was the monopoly that the mainstream media had. They would get all those questions in the front row.
Right.
And when
so
I was
people, you're right. That's a good way. The mainstream, I call them the big feet. But yeah, and there are legitimate people like in the back who just would never get a question. And I think it's important to get everybody involved.
Yeah, and I had a sense when I was at MSNBC that one of the reasons they cared about me not rocking the boat was because it endangered whether Chuck Todd was going to get the first question. That NBC was in great situation with the Obama administration, and they took great pride in getting the first question, and that if I'm rocking the boat, Chuck was worried that he wasn't going to get it, and that was a thing they cared a lot about, even though in reality, what goddamn difference does it make?
That is so true, by the way. Your instincts were absolutely right. And the other thing they worry about is, first of all, that they won't get called on, which means that for their evening broadcast, they don't have their reporter on camera asking the press secretary a question or the president a question. Number one. Number two, they may lose their seat on Air Force One.
So, but think about that.
So to a certain extent, you got to say the Trump administration doesn't give a damn about that.
Yeah.
They don't care. They'll alienate anybody.
So it was for fame, it was for access, it was for privilege, right? And so that old system sucked, and that's partly what the people were rebelling against.
Right.
Trump is more populist, and people don't like the media. He fights against the media. Those things by themselves are not wrong, right? It's what they say that's wrong, right? If they did all that without lying or without saying outrageous, crazy things, okay.
Yeah.
The content's the problem.
Right. And the personal attacks on members of the media are just, I think, beyond the pale. I mean, people are just doing their job. And if they report the truth, and, for example, Trump says this and Spicer says that, that's a fact, right? Kellyanne Conway talks about the Bowling Green Massacre. If somebody points out there wasn't such thing as a Bowling Green Massacre, that's a fact.
Yeah.
There are not alternative facts. And that's something that they still prefer to live under.
Right. And so I want to go back to, because we mentioned MSNBC, Chuck Todd. I did not know, and I'm so glad you told me that we're in the same, that you are in the same boat as everyone else that MSNBC fired during the Iraq War things. Because Phil Donahue, obviously number one radio show at the time, gone. Right. Internal memo, now we know, was let go because he wasn't waving the flag during the Iraq War. And then I was interviewing Jesse Ventura one day, and he's like, I had a multi-million-dollar deal with MSNBC. And I said, I remember you got that deal, but you were never on air. What happened? He said, they found out I was against the Iraq War. And they said, we're not going to let you out of the contract. We don't even want you going to any other competitor. We're going to pay you the millions of dollars, but not put you on air.
Yeah.
And then there's Ashley Banfield, who gave the speech against the war in Kansas. And then they take her out, put her in a closet, literally, moved her office. Just like, not only are you off the air, again, wouldn't let her out of the contract, but we're going to make an example out of you. Okay, if you don't do what we tell you to do in terms of bowing your head to the U.S. government and whatever war they'd like to start, we're going to show everybody that you wind up in a closet. Okay? Right. And then you and Pat against the war, they remove you too.
Right, exactly, yeah. And we were king of the afternoon. We were on from 1 to 3 in the afternoon, and there was no competition, basically. But I have to tell you, I also got fired from KABC Radio in Los Angeles because I opposed the first Iraq War, George H.W. Bush's war. And I was the only one on the station that did not support the war.
Yep.
George Green, who was the news director at the time, or the general manager at the time, told me that he couldn't accept the fact that I was against the war because they needed, for their ratings, they needed balance. And I said, George, and I went through the list. Michael Jackson, Ray Bream, all these people who were on the air.
Yeah.
Ken and Bob in the morning. I said, they all support the war. I am your balance.
It isn't about balance. It's about a certain line you got to toe. But guys, isn't that amazing? I mean, that's why, again, I do these interviews, because there's so many lessons to learn. So the reality is that the media has been controlled for a long time, right? There was a bounds of acceptable opinion, and you could not go outside those bounds. Now, when they see you getting fired from KABC, when they see you getting fired from MSNBC, I didn't get fired, but I left because of the similar reasons at MSNBC. Ashley Banfield in a closet. What that does is it teaches everyone else in the room, don't go outside the bounds.
Absolutely.
And that's why you have the status quo, pro-establishment, mainstream press that you have today, because they were trained to do that.
They're cowed too easily, which I have to tell you, which is why I was really impressed that with the New York Times, I think when they said on their front page last week, Donald Trump repeats the lie about how many people were on the mall or something.
Yeah.
Or no, I'm sorry. It was the 3 to 4 million or 3 to 5 million people voted for Hillary Clinton. They used the word lie on the front page in the headline. There's a big discussion right now, and too many of the media, I think, they think they have to say exaggeration maybe, or falsehood, or misstatement. No, these are fucking lies, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this guy makes shit up.
His only evidence for 3 to 5 million illegal votes for Hillary Clinton came from a guy who, and he said, oh, there's dead people that are voting, and then there's people registered in all sorts of different states. First of all, you can be registered in different states. That's not voter fraud. If you vote in different states, that's voter fraud.
Exactly.
And it turns out that guy was registered in three different states. So he knew all about it. Anyway, last thing, Obama. So I know we all know Trump's crazy and all that, right? But it is an interesting, different dynamic that you were seeing in the press briefing room. You wrote something nice in your book that you gave me, but I'm curious, like, for the folks who don't know, what was your opinion of him going in, for the folks, and your opinion of him going out?
You know, first of all, going in, I was so full of hope, right? And I think a lot of us were that he was the charger on the white horse who was going to be the great progressive president that we'd always been working for and dreaming of all of our lives, right? And I saw him up close, and and as much as I admired him and supported him, I just found myself disappointed that on so many issues he didn't fight hard. I'll just give you one little one, is that the Employee Free Choice Act was one thing where make it easier for people to form a union, right? I'm a big union guy, have been all my life. And he said that was the number one priority for the unions. He told them that was going to be his number one priority. He didn't do shit for 4 years, didn't do anything. In the first 4 years, he didn't do anything about guns. He never talked about it. He didn't do anything about immigration reform in the first 4 years. And then they came up with Obamacare, and Obamacare was like, it's better than what we used to have, but I'm a single payer guy, right? And Obamacare, as Bernie points out, leaves the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies in charge. And then I never saw Obama work so hard on anything, because he was sort of this diffident guy,
Above the fray.
Above the fray. Except till it got to TPP, which was another one of these trade deals, bad for American workers, and he just busted his balls on that thing, trying to, getting Republicans the whole, and he got it passed with all Republican votes. So, as much as I loved him and supported him, I was just disappointed. That's why I wrote a book called Buyer's Remorse, where I gave him credit for all the good things that I think he'd done. Saving the auto industry, bringing this country back from the brink of economic ruin. But toward the end, right, I would look at him and I'd say, this is really a good man, and he knows his shit, and he knows what he's doing, and he really works hard on it. I still believe that. And it's going to be different if, God forbid, ever Donald Trump ever got there. And now when I see Donald Trump, and I think, man, I'd take a Barack Obama in a New York second. I would take George W. Bush in a New York second.
Yeah,
over Donald Trump.
Yeah,
I mean, I think we're really in trouble as a country with this guy in the White House.
You want to talk about buyer's remorse, right? I think we're going to have buyer's remorse in a big, big way.
Right.
All right, then, let's super last question then. 4 years maybe of Trump.
You know me, I talk for a living. Shit.
So, what do you think happens? I mean, when you say big, big trouble, what do you worry about? What do you think is going to be the end result here?
I worry that the economy could tank. It hasn't yet. I'm surprised that the economy has responded, particularly the market.
Bill, it's been 2 weeks.
I know, but the market, since he's elected, I'm surprised the market's responded so positively to Donald Trump.
Yeah, I thought they'd crash in the beginning too, and I think then it's a sugar high. They're like, oh, he's just going to give us deregulation and lower taxes. Okay, that's not so bad, right?
Right.
But it's a sugar high.
I believe,
fundamentally.
No, I do. I believe it is. But I think that we're going to see a huge setback in voting rights. I think we're going huge setback. That's his agenda. It's their agenda. I think it's going to be a huge setback in women's rights, for sure. That's why I put this guy on the Supreme Court. You know what his litmus test here, and Gorsuch hasn't talked about, but he had to agree to that litmus test, or he wouldn't be where he is. I think he's going to alienate all of our friends around the world, and could easily take us into some military situation, if not all-out war. And look at the first action, the strike in Yemen, which the military advised him against, and he just said, let's go, let's do it, right? He wants to show how strong he is,
right? And
it was a botched operation. So on so many fronts, I mean, now what's going to happen? What I hope happens is that the Republican Party realizes that this guy is really I think our hope today rests on the Republicans more than Democrats against Donald Trump. And what I hope happens is that enough Republicans realize that he is so bad for the brand that he's going to destroy the party, and that there's a strong challenge, Republican Party challenge for Donald Trump 4 years from now. Meanwhile, we've got to rebuild the Democratic Party, which is a whole other conversation we should have sometime.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
I think it needs to shake up from top to bottom.
Because,
but I that's what I think has to happen. And at some point, I'm not saying they're going to impeach him, but they may say, we got to get this guy out of here. And I don't know who that person is.
I don't either.
But a Republican challenger.
Yep. There's 1,000 different ways we can go because he's so wild. He doesn't even know what he's going to do. And so everybody, buckle up. It's going to be a wild, wild ride for 4 years.
Yeah. I don't want them to impeach him because I don't want Mike Pence as president.
Yeah. Pick your poison, right?
Exactly. So I'd rather get rid of both of them. Hope we can survive 4 years and then get rid of both of them.
Yep. All right, Bill Press. Everybody check out youtube.com/.
Great to be part of your team, man.
Thank
really
you.
Thank you.
Great to have you in the TYT network. I love it. Thank you, Bill.
We'll do great things together.
Yep.